Grandpa always loved me more, so he left the house to me, and you, the old dog, the brother gloated, waving the will. The girl simply hugged the dog, feeling a key hidden beneath its collar. When the brother found out what the key was for, he started tearing his hair out. The funeral bell tolled softly, almost inaudibly, but for Audrey, each chime echoed as a dull ache in her chest. Slanted streams of rain drummed on the black umbrellas of those gathered, as if nature itself were mourning the passing of William Grantham. Clutching an old photograph to her chest, shielding it from the raindrops, she gazed at the yellowed image. In it, a 10-year-old girl sat beside a silver-haired man, surrounded by bookshelves, with an open volume of Saint-Exupéry resting on her knees. "Remember, Audrey, the most important things can't be seen with the eyes," William's words echoed in her memory. The spacious living room felt empty without its master. Through tall windows framed by velvet curtains, the evening light barely filtered in. The antique clock on the mantel kept counting the seconds, unaware of the loss that had occurred. The place breathed silence and emptiness. Curled in the corner of the sofa, Audrey absent-mindedly stroked the aging border collie, who rested his heavy head and sighed in rhythm with her thoughts. "Why did you leave?" "I have so many questions only you could answer," she thought, looking at the portrait above the fireplace, where William's piercing eyes and characteristic half-smile seemed to guard some unspoken secret. Her brother James was pacing nervously across the Persian rug, glancing now and then at the gold watch on his wrist. At 32, he was already a notable figure in business circles, but as Audrey silently noted, he had lost something important in that endless chase. "When is this Edward going to show up?" James muttered, casting a glance at their mother. "I have a conference call in an hour." Helen, an elegant woman with barely visible gray in her chestnut hair, gave her son a warning look. "Can't you set your business aside for one day, James? Your grandfather left us only 3 days ago." "That's exactly what I'm saying, Mom. Life goes on. The traders in Singapore aren't going to wait for me." The creaking of door hinges cut him off mid-sentence. A silver-haired man with a leather briefcase entered the room, Edward Connolly, the family lawyer. Behind him followed Margaret, the elderly housekeeper, her eyes red from crying. The lawyer cleared his throat, pulled a folder from his briefcase, and put on thin-rimmed glasses. "If I may, I'd like to begin the reading of the last will and testament of William Arthur Grantham," he said in a formal tone. The will was drawn up and notarized 9 days before his death, and it fully revokes all prior instructions. Out of the corner of her eye, Audrey saw James straighten up and stop pacing. His face took on the look of focused calculation that she had seen so many times, the one he wore while closing major deals. Already calculating his share, she thought, feeling a sudden wave of bitterness. "I, William Arthur Grantham, being of sound mind and memory, do hereby dispose of my estate as follows," Edward read aloud. "To my daughter, Helen Grantham Kowalski, and her husband, Richard, I leave my shares in Grantham Industries, valued at approximately $3 million at the time the will was written." Helen squeezed her husband's hand. Audrey knew her mother's relationship with her grandfather had never been smooth, especially after that ill-fated investment decision that had led to significant financial losses 5 years ago. "To my grandson, James Richard Kowalski, I leave the family estate, along with all movable property contained therein and the bank accounts linked to the management of the house," Edward continued. The corners of James's lips curled into a smug grin. "Makes sense. Grandpa always appreciated my business sense." With the explicit note that the land itself is not part of the inheritance, as it legally belongs to the family trust, Edward concluded the sentence. James frowned for a moment but quickly composed himself. He's not even listening to the details, Audrey thought. All he cares about is getting the house. "And finally, to my granddaughter, Audrey Elizabeth Kowalski, I leave my loyal friend and companion, Rocky, who was my true support in recent years," Edward finished the main section of the will. The silence that filled the room was almost tangible. Something inside Audrey broke. She hadn't been after the inheritance, but just the dog? Absent-mindedly, she kept stroking Rocky, who, as if sensing what was happening, lifted his head and looked at her intently with his deep brown eyes. "Thank you," Grandpa, she whispered, her gaze resting on the portrait. James immediately seized the moment. Nothing personal, sis, he muttered with feigned sympathy, stepping closer. Just business. Grandpa always saw me as the heir to the family legacy, so he left me the $15 million mansion. And you? An aging mutt. He waved a copy of the will. Black and white. I guess your Sunday poetry readings didn't count for much. Her throat tightened, her eyes stung, but Audrey only turned toward the window, jaw clenched. Showing vulnerability was a luxury she couldn't afford in front of her brother. Grandpa always had his reasons for the choices he made, she said evenly. But James wasn't finished. That dangerous spark lit up in his eyes, the same one he had as a child when he knew he'd found her weak spot. Face it, sis. You inherited a bag of dog food. I got a $15 million asset. And you know what's first on my renovation list? Tearing down that outdated garden where you and Grandpa used to stargaze and talk nonsense. Those words hit harder than all his previous smugness. The garden, her childhood refuge, the place of secret talks and constellations. Audrey hugged Rocky closer. The dog whimpered softly, as if sharing her pain. Let's go, buddy. There's nothing left for us here, she said, rising to her feet. Audrey, her mother called out, concerned. You crossed the line, son, Richard said sternly. But Audrey was already heading for the exit, her new companion by her side. Audrey's one-room apartment in the suburbs felt even smaller with a large border collie in it. She laid out a blanket on the floor and set down bowls of water and food, items she had thoughtfully taken from her grandfather's house. Well, this is your home now, she said, sitting beside the dog. Not as spacious as Grandpa's, but we'll manage. Rocky sighed heavily and rested his head on her knees. Audrey noticed the collar was worn and rubbing his neck raw. Let me take that off for you, she offered, unbuckling it. We'll get you something more comfortable. After removing the old, tattered collar, she noticed part of the inner lining had come loose. Peeking inside, she spotted a tiny double stitch that looked different from the rest of the seam. Carefully, she cut the thread with a utility knife and pulled out a slim pouch. Inside was a flat brass key of antique design. What is this? She murmured in surprise, examining the find. Clever, Grandpa. You knew Rocky wouldn't let anyone but me remove the collar. Her thoughts were interrupted by the ring of her phone. The screen showed Margaret's name. Good evening, Margaret, Audrey answered. How are you, sweetheart? The housekeeper's voice was filled with genuine concern. Holding up. Rocky and I are settling in. Well, the housekeeper hesitated, choosing her words. Your brother has already started tearing the house apart. He's listed half the furniture for sale on some online auction site. Says it's all junk. A dull ache returned beneath Audrey's ribs. That old furniture carried the family's history. It had witnessed so many important moments. I figured as much, she said quietly. I almost forgot why I called, Margaret added. Your grandfather left something for you. A sealed envelope. He asked me to give it to you after the will was read. Can you come by and pick it up? Audrey's heart quickened. A letter from Grandpa? Of course, Margaret. I'll come tomorrow. After ending the call, Audrey sat holding the key for a long time. Her intuition told her it was somehow connected to the mysterious letter. Returning to the house that now belonged to James turned out to be harder than Audrey had expected. Not a trace of its former warmth remained. Workers in overalls were scraping off old wallpaper in the hallway, bits of plaster littered the floor, and the air was heavy with the stench of construction chemicals. He didn't even wait a month after the funeral, she thought bitterly as she made her way to the kitchen, where Margaret was waiting. The elderly housekeeper, her work-worn hands visibly trembling, handed her a sealed envelope made of thick paper. Here. He told me to give this to you after the official reading of the will. Audrey took the letter. The familiar handwriting, with its light slant and distinctive flourishes, made her pause for a moment. Thank you, Margaret, she said, and began to read. My dearest Audrey. If you're reading this, it means I'm no longer with you. Don't be sad. I lived a full life, especially thanks to our talks about literature, art, and the stars. My decision regarding the inheritance may seem strange to you. But you've always seen beyond the surface, unlike your brother. Remember the story about the old sea captain who hid his treasure so that only the worthy could find it? Today, that's more than just a tale for a child. Rocky is your loyal friend now. And he is the keeper of the key to what truly matters. With love, William. Audrey read the letter twice, gradually connecting the key with the hints in the message. The key, she whispered, showing it to the housekeeper. Margaret, does this look familiar to you? Margaret examined the object carefully and her face changed. Glancing around, she spoke in a near whisper. It's from your grandfather's study. More precisely, from the secret room behind the bookshelf. She hesitated. I never thought I'd tell anyone. William shared that secret with me 20 years ago when I accidentally found him in there. He told me I was the only one who knew, besides himself. What about James? Audrey asked, her heartbeat quickening. Margaret shook her head. Your brother rarely entered the library. He and your grandfather held their business meetings in the downstairs study or the conservatory. Besides, the entrance is hidden behind a complex mechanism. You have to know the exact sequence of actions. Grandpa planned everything, Audrey realized. Why didn't you tell me about the room after his death? She asked. A flicker of dignity flashed in the housekeeper's eyes. He made me promise not to tell anyone about it, not even you. Margaret, he told me shortly before the end, Audrey must find the way herself. Only then will she understand the value of what she discovers. I've served this family for nearly 50 years, dear. William trusted me, and I would never betray his last will. The bookshelf in the old library turned out to be the only piece of furniture James hadn't yet put up for sale, most likely because the massive mahogany structure was built into the wall and appeared to be part of the house's architecture. Audrey slowly ran her hand along the spines of the books, searching for a hidden mechanism. Something told her the key to the secret wasn't just a brass object, but also a particular book. Which volume meant the most to Grandpa? The realization struck her suddenly. She reached up to the top shelf and pulled out a worn copy of The Little Prince, the same one they used to read together when she was 10. As she removed the book, there was a barely audible click. A portion of the bookshelf moved forward a few inches. Audrey froze, then carefully tugged at the protruding edge, and the shelf slid aside smoothly, revealing a low door made of dark wood. The antique key fit perfectly into the lock. Behind the door was a small room filled with leather-bound books, ancient maps, and a massive antique safe. The air was rich with the scent of old paper, wood polish, and her grandfather's distinctive cologne, with notes of sandalwood and nutmeg. I never imagined this place existed, she whispered, looking around. The atmosphere of the room was steeped in her grandfather's presence, and Audrey was suddenly swept into a vivid memory, as if she had traveled 6 years into the past. There had been no warning of storms that evening, not even from the meteorologists, but it came, with claps of thunder and blinding flashes of lightning. 22-year-old Audrey had burst into her grandfather's house, drenched to the skin and sobbing uncontrollably. What happened, sweetheart? William appeared from the hallway, surprised by her sudden arrival. She couldn't speak, she just handed him a folded letter, a rejection from a publisher. The third in 6 months. I'm worthless, she finally choked out. I spent 2 years writing a book no one wants. Her grandfather gently pulled her into an embrace, ignoring her wet clothes. Come with me. He led her to the second floor, to his small study next to the library, not the hidden room she was in now, but another, well known to the family. He approached an unremarkable cabinet in the corner, took a key from his pocket watch, and opened it. There's something I want to show you, he said. Inside lay a manuscript bound in plain leather. Twilight Over the Hills, Audrey read aloud. By William Grantham? You wrote a book? He nodded. I was a little younger than you. I spent 4 years on it. Sent it to 15 publishers. All rejected it. He opened the final page, where yellowed rejection letters were sewn in, some bearing cruel, even humiliating remarks. "But I've never seen your book before," Audrey said, puzzled. "Because I gave up," he replied quietly. "I hid the manuscript, turned to business, started a family. And 30 years later, a well-known publisher told me it could have been a great book if only I hadn't quit." He took her hands. "I didn't have anyone who believed in me the way I believe in you. I was alone. But you have me. And I'm telling you, you're talented. Keep writing." At that moment, she saw her grandfather differently, not just as a successful businessman and loving grandpa, but as a man with an unrealized dream, with private pain. "Your brother loves numbers and bank reports," he continued, looking her in the eyes. "But you, Audrey, you see what truly matters. This house holds many treasures that can't be measured in money. Someday, you'll understand what I mean. For now, promise me you'll never stop looking beneath the surface." "I promise," she whispered. The next day she rewrote the first chapter. A month later, she finished the new version of the book. And 6 months after that, she signed her first publishing contract. Now, standing in the hidden room she hadn't even known existed, Audrey realized her grandfather had meant more than she could comprehend back then. The house truly did hold treasures, invisible to the surface eye. On the desk near the narrow window stood that same framed photo, the two of them reading together. Beside it lay another envelope, labeled "For Audrey." With trembling fingers, she opened it. Inside was a heavy key to the safe, and a note. "The real treasure isn't within the walls of this house, but in what lies behind them. This secret has been passed down in our family for 5 generations. Now, it belongs to you." Audrey inserted the key into the safe's lock and turned it. The mechanism clicked with a deep metallic sound, and the heavy door slowly swung open. Inside were yellowed documents, leather-bound journals, maps with pencil markings, and a small jewelry box. Audrey carefully picked up the top document and unfolded it. It was an original land deed dated to the 1870s. "These are the complete ownership documents for the land," she murmured, flipping through the fragile pages. "It says the property is almost 3 times larger than what's officially recorded. And beneath it..." Her eyes widened in shock as she read the next lines. "A rare earth deposit?" Among the old papers was a modern document, dated just a month earlier, a geological survey from a well-known company, confirming the presence of significant reserves of valuable minerals. But the most important document was another, an official order from her grandfather regarding the land trust, properly notarized and registered 2 weeks before his death. It clearly stated that William Grantham was transferring management of the family land trust to his granddaughter, Audrey Elizabeth Kowalski. The order would take effect after his death, on the condition that Audrey accept his dog Rocky as part of the inheritance. So that's what it was. Rocky wasn't just an inheritance, he was the condition, she whispered, astonished by her grandfather's foresight. "Grandpa knew and checked everything," Audrey said in awe. "He commissioned a modern survey to verify the old records." At the back of the safe, she found one more letter. "Dear Audrey, our ancestors always suspected the mineral wealth of these lands, but the technologies of the past couldn't determine the exact composition or value. The recent study confirmed what had long been written in the family chronicles. I couldn't tell you directly, James is too impulsive and ambitious. Any leak of information could have had unpredictable consequences. That's why I chose this path. Now it's up to you to decide how to handle this legacy, with wisdom." Audrey carefully gathered the documents, took several photos with her phone, and, after securely closing the hidden room, left the library. She knew exactly where to go next. The offices of Connolly and Partners occupied an entire floor in a sleek, modern building overlooking the river. Edward personally greeted Audrey and led her into his office, a spacious room where the formal atmosphere was softened by antique bookshelves filled with legal volumes. After closely examining the documents she brought, the lawyer removed his glasses and thoughtfully rubbed the bridge of his nose. "This changes the situation significantly," he finally said. As you heard during the reading of the will, your grandfather specifically noted that the land parcel was a separate inheritance item, not part of the main will. And this is why, according to these documents, your grandfather established a special two-tier inheritance system. I don't quite understand, Audrey frowned. You see, Miss Grantham, Edward explained, the main will I read to the family concerned only your grandfather's personal assets, the house, shares, financial accounts, and, as you recall, his dog. But at the same time, there was a second legal instrument, a land trust directive, which is drafted separately from a will. This directive is not read publicly, it takes effect automatically upon the death of the grantor. Edward pointed to a stamped document. Your grandfather created several interconnected legal structures. First, a land trust with many restrictions on land use, it's been in existence for nearly 100 years. Second, an emphyteusis agreement, which gives the building's owner the right to use the land, but under strict conditions. And third, and most importantly, a directive naming you as the new trustee of the land trust, which gives you full control over the property. He removed his glasses and continued. Note the condition stated in the document, you receive control of the trust only if you accept the inheritance of his dog. This legally ties together two separate inheritance actions. A very elegant solution, I must say. So James never actually inherited the land? Audrey asked. Exactly. He owns the house, but not the land beneath it. This kind of legal structure was upheld in the case of Haymarket versus Timberton, 1967. Why did Grandpa choose such a complicated route? Audrey asked, still trying to wrap her head around it. Edward looked at her over his glasses, thoughtful. Your grandfather once told me, what comes easy is easily lost. Real value lies in the search. In our final conversation, he said he wanted the heir to undergo a kind of test, to find the key, solve the riddle, show patience and insight. He wanted to make sure you chose not out of greed, but because you valued something deeper. And keep in mind, you accepted Rocky without hesitation, even believing you hadn't inherited anything of value. He read me like an open book, Audrey thought with a sad smile. And if James tries to contest the will? He might try, the lawyer said calmly, but the documents are watertight. Your grandfather consulted with the best property law specialists to eliminate any legal loopholes. In the days that followed, Audrey immersed herself in studying the materials she had discovered. In her ancestors' journals, she found references to hidden wealth beneath the ground, which she had always considered family folklore, but now they were taking on tangible meaning. She also contacted the geological firm that conducted the most recent survey and received detailed explanations. The site indeed contained significant deposits of lanthanum, neodymium, and other rare earth elements, highly valued in modern industry. After consulting with experts in environmental and sustainable development, Audrey began shaping a plan for an ecologically responsible mining operation with minimal impact on the landscape. Part of the future revenue, she decided, would go toward establishing an educational foundation in her grandfather's name. It was time to inform James of her discovery. When Audrey arrived at the estate, James was supervising a crew tearing down historic interior walls in the east wing. "What brings you here?" he asked with surprise upon seeing his sister. "Forget something from the dog's belongings?" Audrey felt a wave of irritation rising but forced herself to stay calm. "No, James. I came to talk about the future of this house and the surrounding property." James laughed, as if she had made a clever joke. "The future? The house is mine, and I'll do with it as I see fit. Or did Grandpa put something in the will I missed?" So predictable, Audrey thought bitterly. At that moment, Edward Connolly entered the room, accompanied by two men in dark suits. "Mr. Kowalski," the lawyer said, addressing James, "you need to take a look at these documents." He handed James a folder. Audrey watched as the smug confidence on her brother's face turned to confusion, then disbelief, and finally, anger. "What the hell is this?" "A forgery," he shouted, waving the papers. "These are the original land ownership records, James," Audrey explained calmly. "Grandpa did leave you the house, but the land it stands on and all the surrounding property legally belongs to a trust, and I've been appointed its trustee. You heard that part at the reading, you just didn't pay attention. One of the men accompanying Edward stepped forward. Allow me to introduce myself, Daniel Royce, Greentech Industries. We're interested in acquiring development rights for the rare earth deposit recently discovered on this property. According to preliminary assessments, the reserves are valued at approximately $120 million at current market prices. However, the development investment will require at least $40 million. A full economic evaluation will only be possible after test drilling and detailed analysis of the ore content. James turned pale so quickly that for a moment, Audrey feared for his health. You knew all along? And Rocky, the key? I found out 3 days ago, Audrey replied. The key was hidden in his collar. It led me to the trust document Grandpa prepared separately from the main will. James's reaction was so sudden and intense that Audrey instinctively stepped back. Always composed and in control, he now completely lost it. No! This can't be happening, he shouted, grabbing his hair and yanking so hard that a few strands remained in his fingers. I was his heir. I visited him every week, handled his affairs, managed his investments. And you just flipped through old books with him. It's not about the books, James, Audrey said firmly. It's about the fact that I loved him, not his wealth. At that moment, the door flew open and Helen and Richard walked in. What's going on here? Their mother asked anxiously. We could hear shouting from outside. What happened? Richard asked, noticing the papers scattered on the floor. Edward quickly summarized the situation. Helen turned to her daughter in disbelief. Why didn't you tell us sooner? I just found out myself, Mom, Audrey replied. Still stunned, James turned furiously to the lawyer. I'll contest this. I'll hire the best lawyers in the country. Bribe judges if I have to. His voice, though furious, betrayed a desperation that clashed with his flawless appearance. You're free to try, Edward responded calmly, but the documents are airtight. Your grandfather consulted the top property law experts to ensure there were no legal loopholes. Richard placed a hand on his son's shoulder, trying to calm him. Son, get a grip. We can find a compromise, as a family. What family? James snapped, shaking off his father's hand. She was always his favorite. Always. And I was just a machine he used to solve financial puzzles, wasn't I? He turned toward Audrey, and she was startled to see not just rage in his eyes, but a deep, long-buried pain. Enjoying the moment, are you? You're rich now, and me? I'm stuck with a house that's worthless without the land. Audrey opened her mouth to reply, but James stormed out of the room, slamming the door behind him. The following weeks turned into a prolonged crisis for Audrey. Just as he'd promised, James hired a legal team and filed a lawsuit challenging the trust directives. At the same time, he launched a smear campaign against his sister in business circles, spreading rumors that the documents were forged. A local newspaper published an article filled with not-so-subtle insinuations that Audrey had manipulated her ailing grandfather during his final days. While no formal accusations were made, the subtext was unmistakable. Has money really clouded his mind this much? Audrey wondered, sitting in her kitchen with an untouched cup of tea. Or was it always in him, and I just refused to see it? Rocky, sensitive to her mood, lay beside her, resting his heavy head on her lap. Recently, the vet had diagnosed him with dilated cardiomyopathy, a serious heart condition that required expensive treatment. Audrey had taken on extra hours at the library, where she worked as a consultant. The phone rang, loud and unexpected. Margaret was calling. Audrey, dear, you need to come right away, the housekeeper's voice was urgent. James arranged to sell everything from your grandfather's library to an antique dealer. The truck's coming in 2 hours. Audrey's chest tightened. That library housed rare editions collected over decades, first editions signed by Dickens, unique medieval manuscripts. It wasn't just a book collection. It was the embodied soul of William Grantham. "I'll be there in 15 minutes, she said firmly. Arriving at the estate, Audrey saw workers under James's direction preparing to load the bookshelves into a truck. Her brother looked exhausted, his face gaunt, shadows under his eyes, and streaks of early gray in his hair that she hadn't noticed before. He looks terrible, she thought, surprised by a sudden pang of compassion. "Stop this, James," she said as she approached. "You can't sell Grandpa's books." "I most certainly can," he snapped coldly. "The house and all movable property inside it belong to me. Or have you already forgotten that clause in the will? These aren't just objects, they're his memory. And you're the one to talk about memory?" James raised his voice. "You got everything. You stole my inheritance." The workers paused, openly watching the unfolding scene. Audrey took a deep breath to keep her composure. "Let's talk inside," she suggested. James hesitated, then gave a sharp nod and headed for the house. Audrey followed, her heart pounding. They entered the living room, the only space that still bore traces of its former warmth. Perhaps James hadn't had the heart to destroy the room where the family gathered every Christmas. "What do you want?" he asked, pouring himself a glass of whiskey from a crystal decanter. His hand was visibly shaking. Audrey steadied herself. "I want to end this war. It's destroying both of us." "Ha! Destroying? You, with your millions?" "Wealth doesn't equal happiness, James." "Spare me the sentimental crap." He downed the glass in one go and poured another. "You were always the golden girl, the perfect granddaughter. And me? I was just trying to earn his approval." His face contorted, veins bulged in his neck, and he slammed his fist on the table, shouting so loudly the crystal rang, "My entire life." There was such raw pain in his voice that Audrey instinctively stepped toward him. "James, Grandpa loved you." "No," he cut her off. "If he did, he wouldn't have humiliated me like this. He wouldn't have taken away what was rightfully mine." "That's not what happened," Audrey said softly. "He gave you the house for a reason. He wanted you to learn to see beyond material things." James let out a bitter laugh. "Oh, here we go. Another pearl of wisdom from Audrey, the philosopher's favorite. You know what? Take your land and your millions. I'll sell this house and move abroad. Start over somewhere I'm not judged by a scale that doesn't even exist." Audrey felt a tightness in her chest. Had she and Grandpa misjudged everything? Instead of giving James a lesson, had they only inflicted another wound? "Listen to me," she said. "I have a proposal." "What proposal?" James asked wearily. "Let's manage this inheritance together. You bring your business experience. I bring my, as you called it, philosophical approach. We could build something Grandpa would truly be proud of." James looked at her with visible distrust. "Why should I believe you? And why would you even want to share?" "Because we're family," Audrey replied simply. "And because beneath all this anger, you loved Grandpa. Just like I did." Suddenly, Audrey's phone rang. Just a day earlier, she had taken Rocky to the vet for a scheduled cardiac checkup. His last test showed worsening results, and the doctor insisted on a more thorough diagnostic. She had promised to pick him up that evening. Seeing the clinic's number on the screen, Audrey frowned. It was too early for a discharge call. "Sorry, I need to take this," she said, stepping away. What she heard drained the color from her face. "What's wrong?" James asked, noticing her reaction. "It's Rocky," she said in a trembling voice. "His condition deteriorated suddenly. He's had a heart attack. The vet says he needs emergency surgery to implant a pacemaker, or he won't make it." She couldn't finish the sentence. James studied her face for several long seconds, then firmly set down his glass. "My BMW is faster than your wreck. Let's go." The veterinary clinic was a half-hour drive from the estate. James drove in silence, speeding through the curves. Audrey sat clutching her phone, silently praying Rocky would pull through. Not now, please. Don't take him now, she begged internally. He's all I have left of Grandpa. He'll make it, James said suddenly. Border Collies are a tough breed. Audrey looked at her brother in surprise. Was he trying to comfort her? I never understood your attachment to that dog, James continued, eyes on the road. To me, animals were always just animals. Rocky's more than a dog, Audrey said softly. He's part of the family. James gave a skeptical grunt. Family, huh? He paused. You know, I always envied the way you and Grandpa understood each other. You could talk for hours about books, stars, philosophy. And I came with profit reports, investment charts, and he'd look at me like he was expecting something else. He wasn't disappointed in you, Audrey replied. He was proud of your success. He just wanted you to see the bigger picture. James didn't answer. They pulled up at the clinic and hurried inside. Dr. Bennett, a veterinarian with 30 years of experience, met them in the hallway. His face was etched with professional concern. Miss Kowalski, Rocky's condition is critical. He has advanced dilated cardiomyopathy. We can attempt to implant a pacemaker, but given his age and overall state, the risks are high. Do whatever's necessary, Audrey replied without hesitation. You should know the procedure is expensive. Standard insurance only covers basic treatment, not. Cost is not an issue, James cut in. I'll cover everything. Do what you need to do. The doctor nodded and rushed off to prepare for surgery. Audrey turned to her brother. James, you don't have to. I do, he said curtly. It's the least I can do. They spent several hours in the waiting room. Audrey flipped through an old travel magazine mechanically. James, unable to sit still, checked emails on his phone and paced the narrow corridor. Do you remember when Grandpa first brought Rocky home? James asked unexpectedly. Audrey looked up. Of course. It was after Grandma passed. He said the house was too quiet without another living being. I thought he was losing it, James admitted with a wry smile. Why get a dog when you could just hire more staff? Staff doesn't give unconditional love, Audrey said. Neither does money, right? James looked at her. You know, I really believed I could buy happiness. Yachts, villas, luxury watches, beautiful women. But the more I collected, the emptier it felt. He tapped his chest. Right here. Audrey was taken aback by such honesty. For the first time in years, her brother was speaking without his usual armor of confidence. Finally, Dr. Bennett reappeared, removing his surgical mask. The operation was successful, he announced. His condition is stable, though the prognosis remains cautious. We removed a small growth from the heart muscle and implanted the pacemaker. He'll need a long recovery and special care. A wave of relief washed over Audrey, her eyes welling with tears. Can I see him? She asked, wiping her face. Just for a moment, the vet nodded. He's still under anesthesia. In the sterile recovery room, Rocky lay surrounded by monitor wires. His chest rose and fell slowly, and his graying face looked peaceful despite the oxygen mask. Audrey gently touched his head, careful not to disturb the four. You did it, brave boy, she whispered. You're as strong as Grandpa. To her surprise, James reached out and lightly stroked Rocky's paw. Hang in there, old man, he said softly. We still need you. On the way back, they said little, but the atmosphere had shifted. When James pulled up to the estate, he turned to Audrey. I'll think about your proposal, managing the inheritance together, he said. Give me a few days. It was the first glimmer of hope in weeks. Rocky's recovery was slow but steady. Audrey spent every spare moment by his side, reading aloud, just like she had once done with Grandpa. Surprisingly, James also began visiting regularly. He always checked in with the vet and brought little things for Rocky, unsalted boiled chicken, soft carrot sticks approved by the cardiologist. One evening, as they left the clinic together, James said, Let's grab a coffee. We need to talk. They sat at a small cafe nearby. James looked different, calmer, as if he had finally made peace with something. I withdrew the lawsuit, he said without preamble. And I canceled the library sale. Audrey couldn't hide her surprise. Why? James stirred his coffee pensively. These past few weeks with Rocky in the clinic, they made me rethink some priorities. I realized I don't need that $120 million. Or rather, not at that cost. What cost? Audrey asked quietly. The cost of losing the last thing that connects me to Grandpa, he said, looking up. And to you. Audrey felt a lump rise in her throat. James. No, let me finish, he said, taking a deep breath. You were right about the house. I went upstairs the other day and found my old room, the one I had in high school. He kept everything exactly the same. Even my Pearl Jam poster was still on the wall. He saved all our memories, Audrey said softly. Yeah, James blinked quickly, hiding the sudden glimmer in his eyes. I ruined everything, didn't I? Chased money and forgot what really matters. Audrey reached across the table and placed her hand over his. It's never too late to make things right. What are you planning to do with the deposit? He asked. I've developed a concept for a phased, eco-friendly extraction. Part of the funds will go toward educational projects, just like Grandpa wanted. And I want the house to remain our family home. I want our kids to sit in the garden one day and count falling stars, like we did. James looked at her skeptically. You're not going to kick me out? This is our home, James, Audrey shook her head. Grandpa left it to you for a reason. He wanted you to learn to value the real treasures. A month later, Rocky was discharged from the clinic. It was decided he would live at the estate, there was more space for recovery, and Margaret happily agreed to care for him in their absence. One evening, Audrey and James sat in the garden watching the sunset. Rocky dozed between them, still weakened from surgery but clearly content to be back in familiar surroundings. You know, James said, breaking the silence, I think I'm finally starting to understand what Grandpa meant. What do you mean? Audrey asked. That true wealth isn't measured by the numbers in a bank account. It's in relationships, in trust, in the ability to see value in what can't be bought. That actually sounds wise, she smiled. Not that I've completely given up material comforts, James added with a hint of irony. I just realize now they shouldn't be the only thing I chase. Rocky lifted his head and rested it on James's knee. James gently scratched behind his ear. Can I ask you something personal? He said hesitantly. All this time, even when I acted like a complete bastard, why didn't you hate me? Audrey looked out at the horizon, where the sun was turning the clouds gold and crimson. You know, Grandpa used to say something like, without forgiveness, there's no real love, she said with a shrug. I listened to him. And you're still my brother. No matter what. James didn't say anything, but Audrey noticed him subtly wipe his face. I'm sorry, Audrey. For everything, he said quietly. I already forgave you. 3 years later, the Grantham estate had been transformed while preserving its historical charm. The restored garden, rebuilt using original blueprints, now included modern energy-saving systems seamlessly integrated into the landscape. After comprehensive geological surveys, public hearings, environmental assessments, and the completion of all necessary permits, a process that took nearly 2 years, Grantham Industries began its preparatory work. We won't see the first ore for at least a year, James explained to a group of investors. We've developed a phased approach where each section is rehabilitated immediately after extraction. The model has received high praise from the Institute for Sustainable Land Use. Audrey and James sat on the terrace, discussing the strategy for the charitable foundation. Rocky dozed beside them on a special orthopedic mat, older now, but incredibly resilient, having outlived every veterinary prediction. We've already restored 60% of the previous site. James exclaimed in frustration. The environmentalists got every damn report they asked for. We even transplanted rare plant species. What more do they want? Easy, James, Audrey smiled. It's standard procedure. They're just doing their job. James sighed. When I was focused purely on profit, everything seemed simpler. You know, after the next review meeting, I've scheduled a talk with researchers from the Institute for Sustainable Land Use. They've got a new technique that could speed up natural soil recovery by 30%. Audrey looked at her brother warmly. Who would have thought, 3 years ago, he'd speak so passionately about ecological innovation? James set his documents aside and looked at her with a genuine smile. I never thought I'd enjoy philanthropy more than maximizing ROI. Grandpa saw it coming. That's why he set everything up the way he did, Audrey replied. Helen and Richard joined them, dressed festively. There you are. Helen called. Guests are starting to arrive. Richard bent down to stroke Rocky, who opened one eye and wagged his tail weakly. How's our veteran doing? Still holding on? He's a fighter, James replied warmly, exchanging a glance with his sister. You think he'll enjoy tonight's event? Audrey smiled, her eyes lighting up. The opening of the William Grantham Scientific and Educational Center? I think he'd be thrilled. Together they headed toward the house where guests were gathering. Rocky slowly got to his feet and, one paw at a time, followed them. Around his neck hung a new, lightweight collar with a small silver key-shaped pendant. Audrey glanced back at him and remembered her grandfather's words, the most important things can't be seen with the eyes. Now she understood. The real key he left her didn't unlock material wealth, it opened the way to reconciliation, to restoring family bonds, to recognizing true values. And as she watched James patiently wait for Rocky to climb the last few steps, she knew, wherever Grandpa was now, he was smiling.
If you enjoyed the video, please support it with a like and a comment.